All right, well, welcome back in. Pull up a chair, come up around our redraft roundtable here as we gather around once again this lovely table and we start talking redraft fantasy football. It is end of August. We are in the heart of fantasy football drafts. This last week was probably one of the two busiest weekends out of maybe three that teams are drafting. Most teams may have a draft. I know some people have drafts every night this week, or maybe most nights this week. So we are right in the heart of season, aren't we, Grant?
Yeah, for sure. I think I had a draft last weekend with some college friends, and it was a good time. And yeah, I think we're gearing up to, most Labor Day is a good excuse to, get together with some friends or family and have a couple beers and do your fantasy league. So yeah, big week for fantasy owners. Lots of news. If you have Sleeper or other apps, ESPN, things like that, you're probably seeing a lot of notifications about contracts and injuries, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. So last week we did again a mock draft. We were doing a hero RB versus zero RB draft strategies, and we're going to do another mock draft here today, but we're not going to have the same flair as we did last week. So we're going to just do more value base. Grant, you're picking from the 3 spot in this draft, and I've taken the 8th spot. So we're kind of bookending a little bit on the draft. Um, so as we now, looking at Sleeper, we're seeing ADPs. Before we start on this mock draft, Grant, kind of starting to see a little bit of ADP shifting slightly. Now, you mentioned some of it may be contracts, some of it may be other things going on. We still see CMC is the still the 101 potentially in most leagues. But we've seen kind of Jamar Chase fall down in draft and ADPs. Part of that's probably with contracts. I know it just came out that his status is more day to day. We'll take it one day at a time. What are your thoughts as we approach? If you're in this position and you draft under the 103, how are you thinking? What are your thoughts with some of this contract situation with players holding out? How much risk do we take in the first round here?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people get nervous the last few weeks for the players at the top of the list are typically really good players, and so they usually command or should command a large chunk of their team's salary cap, which means there's usually one or two on this list that need better contracts or revised contracts. And you bring a really good point here of I think in your first round, you're not necessarily going to win your league unless you have a Christian McCaffrey type of situation, but you can lose your league by missing the first few picks. So that's something to think about. And I can kind of see two different things is I'm not necessarily, you can go by either like, I want to avoid contract problems, I want to avoid injuries, I'm going to go with a super safe bet. I'll be honest, I'm in a very competitive 12-man league. I drafted number 3 with CeeDee Lamb's contract and other stuff going on. I went Bijan 3rd overall because I felt like that was a safer play in a 12-man league, especially with just the lack of high-quality running backs the first few rounds. That's what I did, right? So kind of give you a glimpse of like I went safe. Now another guy, right? We got scared of CD, right, because his contract. Well, some guy drafted him 7th. So the guy who had the 7th pick got him, which is like crazy value, right? But that's because of the contract, right? The contract was resolved that I probably would have picked him, right? Honestly, as the 3rd overall. So I kind of go back to your point of you can, for the most part, with the contract situation, there's been one major case, Le'Veon Bell, who was a high-performing fantasy player who did not play the whole year. But the way that the players union and a bunch of other the player contracts are set up, they get fined if they do not play because they're trying to prevent star players from not playing because it hurts the game, hurts the image, hurts the fan base, all these things, right? So it is small likelihood that these players do not play, like a Jamar Chase. It's not non-existent, but it's a smaller chance than we tend. But I think sometimes as fantasy owners, we are hesitant when we see that kind of stuff, and we lock up and we're like, oh well, the next guy doesn't have that problem, so I'm just gonna pick him, right?
Right.
So to me, like I go with what's comfortable at the end of the day. Like if you want to have a team that is like, hey, I want a solid floor, I want to have consistency, I want to go with someone with no drama. That's fine. CD, I mean, you looked at it and he averaged 28 points the last 10 games of the season last year, right? Crazy. So
Yeah.
that is part of the risk because like he has a contract problem, but the upside's incredible. Or like a Devon A. Chain versus like Josh Jacobs, for example, type of situation where it's like there's two types of plays you can go for in roughly the same draft spot. And so that's what you're kind of looking for is like how comfortable do you feel? Do you want the safer play? Do you want something more aggressive?
Right. And I think there's an element where you have to, like you said, balance it out a little bit where
Mm,
how can you get safe and then at the same time what's your upside plays, right? So by taking Bijan, so you mentioned taking Bijan in your league, I'm sure part of that was then you felt comfortable enough with the wide receivers coming back in the second round to
mm,
say, yes, it may
mm.
not be quite a CD Lamb level, but I have a solid running back with Bijan that I can then kind of offset that by getting. So what who is the wide receiver you took in the second round then? Because I'm assuming you went wide receiver in that league.
I actually went. It just the way things fell. I actually went Josh Jacobs. I actually got two.
Okay.
I got two running backs.
Okay.
So the way the value fell, I was like, you know what? I liked those that value and just the way that the receivers were. I got Michael Pittman, I think, in the fourth round, and then I got. I need to look at see my other receiver was here, but yeah. Overall, like just the way that the value fell to me, I felt like it was a better value picking two running backs. So I really deviated from either our hero or a zero RB strategy that
Sure.
we went for in our mock draft, right? Changed up my strategy. We talked about like in the middle of the draft. Really, I just changed it up.
Well, but that's again, you can have a plan, but are you ready to deviate from that? So
Mm,
that's,
yeah.
I'm sure, by having two high caliber running backs, that then allows you to, um, yes, you're giving up value in
Mm,
another position, but you also gain
mm,
value with starting two high
yep.
caliber running backs. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Well, so the one thing I'll say, and I've been thinking about this a little bit, and, you mentioned Le'Veon Bell. That's the one really big documented case of a player holding out all season. And we saw the next season his play level decrease by a lot. Now,
Mm,
that's due to age, that's due to whatever the case. It's a fact that happened. So part of I think the concern I would have, and this is where wait to draft as long as you can. You have drafts in the early part of August. You're drafting all summer long. I get it. It's fun. We're excited. Football's back. We're prepping for it. And now it's late in the season, and I drafted Jamar Chase in with my first three picks. So now what's going to happen? So now we're sitting fretting things. So that'd be my first thing. Is this is why we wait until uh
mm,
late as you can in the season before football starts to draft. But one thing that I think, this is me personally, I've not seen this really, but one thing I'm concerned about is players that have held out for a long time. Are we going to see more soft tissue injuries earlier in the
mm,
year because they've held out of training camps, they've held out of practices, they've held out of all the preseason stuff where, you can be in shape, but are you in football shape? Are you ready
mm,
for the pounding that your body's going to take
yeah.
because it's very tough, it's very physical. So it's not a stay away, but I think it's something to be reminded that, I think I read one article written by the 33rd team that it basically is inconclusive if holdouts are a greater cause for injuries. But I think that goes by player and what they do rather than being at practice. How are they prepping for things? So I
Mm,
think it's something to
yeah.
be at least
Yeah.
aware of. So,
Yeah. And definitely. And I think these guys. And keep in mind, the first couple rounds, these players are studs on their teams, right?
Right.
They're really good at football. They're getting paid or will get paid shortly a lot of money, and they have trainers. They're working out and do stuff on the side. But you bring up a good point: is the team workouts where they're putting on pads. They're not doing that right on their own. They're in their shorts and they're in their t-shirts or tank tops. They're catching balls. They're stretching. They're doing sprints, things like that. They're not going through walkthroughs with the big, massive padded helmets with the linebackers and someone's shoving them when they catch a ball and stuff, right? Like it's a different dynamic and it definitely can be a factor, right? And kind of echoing what you said about drafting as late as possible. Typically, last week of August is the roster cuts. So the
Yep.
NFL goes from whatever number it is down to 53 that you have to have submitted, and you see a lot of movement first off by contracts and also people just being cut and people moving around. People trading like, we have 10 receivers that were on the practice team and of the 80s, however many guys there were in summer. Now we got to get rid of 3 receivers. Boom, boom, boom. Well, that can change the draft order. People
Yep.
get put on IR and things like that once you're officially on a roster. Because those that aren't aware, much like fantasy, IR spots work like same with real football, where you can take a person who is injured and move into an IR spot and free up a roster spot in real football for another person to come onto your team. So you see a lot of people like AJ Dillon a couple days ago get
Yep.
moved to an IR spot because of his injury. Well, guess what happened? This new fantasy updates. Now all of a sudden Josh Jacobs' value, like, it might not go up at all, but now like, all right, behind him there's going to be competition. It's not going to be a clear cut designated back, which might help his value and the trust that he has with LaFleur. So something like that. So just kind of things to think about. Again, I think the late August, early September drafts are probably the best. I mean, right now we're looking at we're 8 days away from football, right? So
Yep.
a week before is probably the best to do it, but people's schedules can be different for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is it. Next
Yeah.
week we'll be on and actually talking, previewing an actual week of football games. We'll be ready for that. So this is,
I know. I'm excited.
yeah, that'll be really exciting. So, well, with that, let's get into this. Let's go through, and again, this is a bunch of bots drafting with us. So this is going straight by ADP. But again, it's
Mm.
a 10 team and 10 team PPR start 3 wide receivers. So
Mute this thing.
we see
Okay.
Christian McCaffrey and CD Lamb go right off the board
Mm.
first. So kind of, I could see CD Lamb kind of starting to creep back up to that 101, 102. So, and here's kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So you take Tyreek with the 3rd pick. Then we see Bijan, Jamar Chase, Brees Hall, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. I think Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown. It really kind of depends on what you feel like, which has a better offense.
Yeah.
Um,
And to me, I think we saw. And again, I don't want to speak for you, but you kind of
yeah,
saw what Jefferson did with the Nick Mullins at quarterback and still put up some good games. So to me, like maybe you feel different, which is why we're all different personalities and stuff in football. But Jefferson's fallen to you in the eighth pick. That's
yep.
good value, in my opinion.
No, I agree, and I
Yeah.
think it's a real toss up because I could see AJ Brown coming back and doing really well here. So I went Jefferson as it's probably kind of a toss up for me who I'd want to take here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so then we see AJ Brown go next, which it'd probably be flipped if I took Brown. Jefferson would have gone next. Then Barkley with then followed up by Wilson, Jonathan Taylor. So again, here I think as I'm thinking about it, what the best value is here. Um, I've heard good reports coming out of Lions camp with Gibbs. I know he had that hamstring injury a few weeks ago, and it's probably a little risky, but I like Gibbs here in the second to kind of get a
Mm.
solid running back here, which then pays off because we see Henry and ETN go right before you're up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, what I'm looking at here, explain my pick a little bit, is the Rams players. I like the Rams players. Kyron Williams, honestly, McVay and his running backs kind of freaked me out. I mean, Kyron got
Sure.
announced that he was doing punt returns, which could be a
Yeah.
smokescreen by McVay. I don't know. But when you have your RB1 who got hurt, if you remember, on a kickoff return, was it 2 years ago? That's when
Yep.
he tore his ACL, I think, or the last year, one of the two. That's a concern, and I also think because of Cup coming back, Puka is riding his ceiling that he had from last year when Cup was out for most of the
Right.
year. So I'm probably honestly going Devontae Adams just because of target share and other factors.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, like you
Yeah.
said, going by value here, you kind of saw what the picks were going to be with Kyron, then Puka went, and so now you still have
Yeah.
pretty good value with wide receiver and or running back here coming in the third.
Yeah. And what I'm probably doing is Tyreek is a pretty safe bet. Devontae Adams is going to command the lion's share of the Raiders' pass attempts as well. So here, I'm going a little more risky. We talked about this before we really started drafting, like the Devon A. Chain versus Josh Jacobs, which you're really getting that like late second, third, is
Yep.
early third is what's happening. I'm going to go A-Chan here just for the upside. I think that he's the consistency I'm not 100% sure about, but I think he'll definitely win you games.
Yeah, and I don't think it's even a bad strategy to get two Miami players because you're talking two of the top
Yeah.
probably three in Miami. So again, going running
Mm-hmm.
back, you see two more running backs go off. I think now we're starting to see a lot more running backs, especially in mocks, where people want running backs. I think early in the summer it's very wide receiver heavy. And I think that's due to best ball formats. They like wide receivers early and often. Um, so here, I think there's a ceiling and floor play, and I'm looking at wide receiver between like Olave and Mike Evans, and Mike Evans has been Mr. Consistent, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't potentially love the Bucks this year, and Olave should be in a better offense position this year with the new offensive coordinator and be the number one target. I'm going to take kind of the youth there, especially having Jefferson, where I want somewhat of an upside with who I might have as my second wide receiver to maybe offset some of Jefferson's game if he has a down game.
Mm-hmm.
So again, back around to me, and we see the quarterbacks go off. If I'm value drafting here, I want to still wait on quarterback. I could go with Lamar Jackson and get one of the top ones, but I think there's value in some of the later quarterbacks here as well. I have issue with both Diggs and maybe Debo, although Debo has a lot of potential here with Ayuk potentially being either traded or still holding out. We're not sure in camp right there. But I think I'm going to take the number one target still for Chicago with DJ Moore in the fourth round. I think that's pretty good value still
Mm-hmm.
for a third wide receiver that's the number one target in his team that should be a good offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. That's the right process. And here, what I'm going to do with my picks is I'm going to kind of manipulate. I'm taking my spot as the third, and we're come around with the snake, and I get the 4-8 and the 5-3. And I'm looking at this and saying, I honestly probably want to pick a Michael Pittman, honestly.
Right?
But I'd be okay with DK Metcalf. So I think what I'm probably going to do is do a Rashad White because I know he's not going to be there again on the way
Right?
around. Get Rashad White, and then by the time that everything swings around, I'm probably going to be looking at a DK Metcalf or maybe not. Maybe he's gone too. But like there you go, Michael Pittman, like we talked about.
Right.
This turn here, I kind of knew like if I didn't get Rashad White, again, these running backs left are not bad running backs. Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones. But I like the upside of Rashad White over those
Yeah.
guys. And then I still got the receiver I could have drafted earlier. So I'm
Sure.
picking Pittman here. So I've got, for me, like I definitely have not touched quarterback, not touched tight end. I think quarterback is probably one of the richest classes we've had in a long time.
Yep.
So I'm not really incentivized to pick any of those anytime early.
Yeah, and I think so. You bring up a good point of looking at your, if you're at the bookends here, you have two teams that have two picks before you. So there's four picks here. Same on my side where there's four picks. You have team two that has one wide receiver, three running backs, and a tight end. So next pick, and I know these are bots, but next pick, if I'm looking at this in a draft, that pick is either a quarterback or a wide receiver coming back around to you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a flip for team one. So I'm looking at this. I like Kenneth Walker here in the fifth to kind of give me one more
Yeah,
running
it's a
back
good value.
where I see three tight ends with two teams that I may want to take a tight end coming back around, but I should have my pick, which there we go. I have my pick now between Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, and George Kittle, where two tight ends went off the board, but I was comfortable with either option I had coming back. So taking the running back. And then I think I am gonna in the sixth here. I like Kincaid's value with again tight
Yeah.
ends, first, second read in an offense, and we like Buffalo's offense, all that stuff we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Josh doesn't really have a lot of targets to throw to, so I think that that's gonna work out better. Here's where I'm gonna like Drake London is gonna command the targets in Atlanta. Kirk
Yep.
Cousins is an upgrade. Um, I think Drake London has a talent. My question, I'm probably picking tight end here. I don't love the value at quarterback right now, where I'm at in the draft. So I'm torn between George Kittle or Kyle Pitts. I'm probably just going to go with the upside again of Kyle Pitts. We've seen his floor with the Falcons. George Kittle, I think there's too many mouths to feed in that offense. If he gets injured, and you might see 0 points, you might see 20.
Yep.
And so I'm kind of taking a little bit of a risk on the Kirk Cousins experience and see what we get here. And look at that. George Kittle's back around again. So I probably could have honestly waited. I thought that maybe team one would have taken one of those guys. So that's why I kind of wanted to pick Pitts. But he decided to go another receiver. Again, I think quarterback, I'm holding off on. Don't really love the value that I'm getting here. What I'm looking for right now, I think, is just next best player. And DeAndre Swift's a possibility, but I'm probably going to go with Terry McLaurin just
Ooh, I like that
because
pick.
the number one target on, again, it's a rookie throwing to him with Jalen Daniels, but I'd rather take a number one receiver versus like a split decision running back with like David Montgomery or something like that later.
Yeah, no, I like that pick. I was honestly eyeing him, but I didn't think he would fall. So I like that pick. And, team one's doing something really interesting where, yes, it's a bot, but if I'm looking at this draft, I would be looking at team one thinking they're obviously going very zero RB heavy, um, all wide
Yeah.
receivers so far. So that's, start looking at that. Running backs are going to start going off the board with him. Here, I think I want to push since both teams behind me don't already have their quarterback. I think I'm going to push to the
Mm.
next round,
Yeah,
knowing they're
smart.
probably not going to get another quarterback right now. But here in the sixth, I don't think the suspension is going to come for Rashi Rice. I think here in the sixth, if there wasn't a potential suspension loom, you would have to draft Rice in more the third, maybe the fourth round, based on what he did last week or last year. So I like the value there. Um, and honestly, here, I think I'm going to go quarterback, like I said, because there's team seven has yet to take one, team five, you have yet to take one. So if I pushed it, I have potentially six picks with, you know, there's four good quarterbacks here. If I really want to say wait, I could, but I think I'm gonna just take the guy I want, and I like Kyler Murray
Mm.
with in both the rushing and throwing, versus a guy like Joe
Yeah.
Burrow where he's more just a pocket passer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that was a good pick. I was actually eyeing. Kyler Murray. I kind of wanted him a little bit, so that's all right. So I'm in the same boat as you right now, where it's like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's me and another guy are the only ones. Oh, there's 3 people that know how to do quarterbacks at this point. So it's kind of like, do I decide to go, this Jordan Love, Dak Prescott situation? Probably I don't right now. Like just based on the bench and everything fills out. I think quarterback's a decent play. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do Najee because I think these guys already have quarterbacks. So when they took the turn, I'll be able to get Dak. I think.
There you go.
Actually, no,
That's a
I'm going
good
to go
play.
Zamir White. I'm going to Zamir White. Actually,
Okay.
I'm
There
lying
you
to
go.
you. Yeah.
Which again,
So
yep,
cool. So there you go.
that's
Yeah. So
called reading
now
the
it's
draft.
kind of like, yeah, now it's kind of like, do we go Jordan Love, right, who had a great year last year, or Dak Prescott, who lost some weapons. Michael Gallup retired. You've got running back room that's kind of a mess, honestly. Probably going to go Jordan Love. I think he's got more support, and I think overall the more complete team um, in the Packers. So probably going to do Jordan Love, like the head coach more. That's probably what I'm going to pick for my
I
quarterback
think
here.
the upside is there to say Jordan Love over even, and Dak
Yeah.
Prescott goes in that round. But I think the upside is there to say go for Jordan Love right there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So here I'm now having to look at. I've got my team, my starters. So I'm looking at bench spots, right? So if I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at bench spots, since I already have Rashi Rice, I don't want Hollywood Brown. I don't need 2 Kansas City wide receivers, especially one starting out on the pup or on the IR spot. So right here, I don't love Austin Eckler here as a running back. I really don't. I want to see. I like the value better with somebody like Chase Brown versus Zach Moss. I
Mm-hmm.
love the value because you get it later. I'll take an ambiguous backfield, but I'll take it later. I'm gonna go kind of with. I think there's value with Deontay Johnson here as
Yeah,
number
I
one
like that a
target
lot.
in Carolina. That he gets a lot of those looks. Um, so by doing that, I think I want to try to remain as balanced as I can. But if I'm a team that believes in Carolina, they're going to do a lot better. If I'm okay waiting, which again, having kind of a risky, I'll say risky running back room right now with Jameer Gibbs and Kenneth Walker, where they're not the epitome of health. So I kind of have to be careful with how I do this. Um, I want to lean long term as far as what could happen with Jonathan Brooks, but at the same time, I kind of don't like that. So I probably be going Jalen Warren here, knowing that he's got a hamstring issue still, but he's gonna be back. They're gonna split carries. It's ambiguous, so I'll take the value with Warren here and hope for the best on that one. Again, it's a bench spot.
Oh, really good. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, I'm kind of in the same spot. Like I have Zamir White, who's an RB1 on my bench, which is great. So I'm trying to get one more really solid, good player, just so that way I've got some kind of backup to my situation. I think for me, looking at some of these guys, I mean, Christian Watson is obviously there. I could pair him with Jordan Love. But yeah, I don't love this spot. It's okay. Yeah, probably go Christian Watson. It's not the worst. I don't necessarily love the pick, but again, when you're in the 10th round, there's just not a lot of options here.
Yeah, I will say Tajay Spears goes a little bit ahead of time here in the 10th, although that's not super high. But that's also his running back one. So I think that's a very precarious spot if you're drafting a team like that to have your RB1 be
Yeah,
Tajay Spears.
yeah. And then I'm gonna go actually and draft your counterpart there in Washington. Oh no, I know. Sorry, you didn't draft him. Team 9 did, but Brian Robinson. On the depth chart, this is RB1, but Eckler is going to be there. But I'm thinking Eckler is just a veteran; he's tired, so I'm kind of stashing Brian Robinson with some hopeful upside there later in the season.
Yeah, I like that. I like that pick. I think that's pretty good. Very good value, actually, especially for the 10th round. So, all right, here's where again, filling out bench, I'd like to get as much upside as I can. Um, and knowing I may have players breaking down, I'm okay taking a rookie running back right here. I have nothing against going with with James Conner, but James Conner has not finished the season. So odds are he misses games. Now, we don't love wishing injury. We will never wish injury on anybody. But if I'm being realistic with how I'm building this, Trey Benson could be a running back that is picking up for me later part of the year. So I'm going to stash
Mm-hmm.
kind of a high profile running back for later on with potential some injury risk early on with some of my um, running back room. So that's kind of my thought there. And I didn't take, I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I didn't take Zach Moss in the 10th because I like the upside of Chase Brown here better. So two
Mm-hmm.
rounds later, and I'm still, again, I'm building some depth to my running back room. Is really all I'm looking at
Yeah.
doing is where can I build some depth?
Yeah. And I'm doing the same. This is maybe not so much depth, more like a dart throw, but I'm gonna pick a running back in the McVay room just because if
Oh,
something happens with Kyron Williams, Blake Corum's running back 1, and getting that in the 12th round, I feel like it's great value.
that's fantastic value. And the comment was made that Kyron is going to return punts, and like you said, I think you alluded to that earlier. That could be a smoke screen, that could be whatever. That's also more opportunity for him to get hurt. So if
Mm-hmm.
he does go down, then Corum can step up. That's great value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then here's another, kind of another option as well. Another dart throw is, looking at the Bills' offense and saying who's throwing, who's
Mm.
Josh Allen throwing to, and Dalton Kincaid's gonna get his target. I think he's gonna do great, but going with Shakir here, just as like probably the RB, the wide receiver 1 on that offense,
Yeah,
maybe
I
behind
like
Curtis
that.
Samuel, but
I
great.
mean, well, Curtis Samuel's dealing with turf toe too, so knowing that he's
Yeah,
dealing with turf
yeah,
toe, Shakir could be that second one or that first wide receiver read. So having Kyler Murray here, I'm okay backing up him with another quarterback. I don't think you always have to back up your quarterbacks, but I'm staring at a quarterback that has unquestionable value, I think. And I know he has plantar fasciitis, but Justin Herbert last year would have had to have been around 4 or 5 pick, and we're in the 13th round. I can take a
yeah,
flyer, and if he
yeah.
doesn't
It's
work
great
out
value.
here, if he doesn't work out, that's fine. I'm not out anything. And again,
Yeah,
he's my backup, not my starter. So I love that
yeah. I think
value
you did a great
there.
job. Fantastic job because you have two quarterbacks that are both very high ceilings, but they've both been injured before.
Yep. Yep. So I think it's good to know what are the injury risks for your quarterbacks for all your players. But so again, I we're building depth. And who do I like to build depth? And this is where throw ADP out the window. You're in the last part of your draft. These are the players. Just go for your guys. See what happens. What's the worst that's going to happen with these picks? So I think I'm okay taking a flyer again. I'm gonna back up my tight end. I don't think he's gonna do. I don't need him to do a whole lot, but Luke Musgrave did very well last year for Green Bay. If that's a good offense, and if some of the receivers go down, it could be a good value pick right there.
Mm, yeah, for sure. And looking at my roster, I got Kyle Pitts. Like I'm honestly starting him every single week, right? Tight ends, there's enough. To me, there's enough streamable value. If somebody gets injured, I'm just screwed, right? Or I have to trade for him. So I don't. To me, at this point, like you got Herbert, which I think was a smart move, but the rest of these quarterbacks, I think, are just on the serviceable. So I'm actually probably not going to back up my tight end or my quarterback here. instead, I'm probably going to look for some rookies. So
There you
I'm
go.
actually going to take a little bit of a flyer here on Troy Franklin with Bo Nix, just to kind of
Oh
see
yeah.
like if it develops into something. Bo Nix looked really good in preseason. Again, this is one of those things where at this point in the ball game or in the draft sequence, the tight ends and quarterbacks are there, right? Everybody's got their
Yep.
quarterback, everybody's got their tight end. Me backing it up is just taking a spot off the waiver wire. I'm not actually doing anything. Um, Same could, I guess, be said about the rookies and stuff, but at the same time, you're grabbing them now instead of later. Um,
You're willing to hold on
you
to
know,
him a little bit longer now.
yeah, exactly. And then here, what I'm probably again just I've got a bunch of receivers, a bunch of running backs here. I'm actually, you know what? I lied. I'm probably going to take Likely as tight end to back up just because Mark Andrews has kind of been struggling with some stuff. So
Yeah.
I might take him in the event that that pays off at some point.
I think that's a fair backup because I think he could have standalone value even without a Mark Andrews injury. But like you said, taking him as your second tight end, backing you up, you can kind of just hold on, see what happens here. So I love the value there with the last pick of just a dart throw. Um,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
here I'm gonna go a little deeper, and again, I've got four wide receivers, then I can start three, or I need to start three plus a flex. And I've got five running backs. The odds are my running backs are probably going to get injured more often than my wide receivers. Now, it's not always the case, but odds are that's more often what happens. So with this, I'm going to take Jaleel McLaughlin has been getting a lot out
Mm.
of. There's been a lot of hype out of it out of Denver camp with him, especially as a pass catcher. So they just let Samaje Perine go as well. So I'll take in my last dart throw basically of maybe he's a serviceable RB2, maybe he's a flex play that Sean Payton offenses typically have, given us a high targeted running back room with how he likes to play. So, kind of your thoughts on, same with Franklin, take a flyer. I'm just going with running back side of that.
Yeah. No, I mean that's what you want to do. I mean, because way to realize too is I think you people can start doing the strategy of hey, I need to draft like backups. I need to draft two defenses or like, I have my kicker, my two defenses, my two tight ends, my two quarterbacks. And, what I typically do is the first like 6, 7 rounds, I'm filling out my positional players, right? I'm filling out
Right.
running back, receiver, tight end generally, right? If you decide to 100% punt, no pun intended, on quarterback, then what's going to happen is if you draft in the 14th round, like a Jalen Daniels or something, he's going to be there on waivers anyways, right? Or Justin Herbert or something. So you got to get to a point where you feel okay with like, hey, I've pushed this person this far. Everyone else on the board has quarterbacks. They're not going to double up a quarterback right now, right? No one's going to do that. Or if they do, it's because they have a high risk, high reward quarterback like Kyler Murray, where it's like he can score you 35, but then he takes a wrong step and blows out his knee. So that's where like you kind of have to understand what's on your draft board. And you and I did this several times on since we were in the 3 and the 7 spots. We were able to kind of use. I'm sorry, you were 8, I was 3. Using those turns to say, all right, these people in front of me don't need tight ends, they don't need receivers, they need whatever, and you're able to kind of like grab value and understand like this player that you really wanted will come back around to you. So that happened several times to both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. You were able to see, Pittman came back around to you on one time. You took
Yep.
White, knowing he's probably wasn't going to be there. You took Pitts, knowing he wasn't going to probably, or you took Pitts before because it was
Mm-hmm.
looking like Team One may have wanted to take him. They pushed it down.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you had some definitely good value there. So overall, as you look at this, it's like you said, you just did a draft where you went running back first 2 rounds, and here in this mock, receivers first 2 rounds. Thoughts on this as you have four starting wide receivers that are number ones, it will start with your 3 spots and your flex. So I'd say that's
Mhm.
great way to fill out your starting rotation where you're not drafting a wide receiver 2 from any team to start for your team.
Yeah, yeah. I overall like my team a lot. I mean, I thought I got value. I got good value where I wanted it. I feel like I didn't really grasp or really try to grab anything. I've got like even my bench, right? Like Zamir White, he's an RB1 that I don't think is
Yep.
going to start right now. And then Brian Robinson is a split back with Eckler. Corum could have the job by the end of the year. And then
Yeah.
Shakir and Franklin are also situations where they could be their lead receivers by the end of the year, and then likely again is backing up a tight end that's had injury problems. So yeah, I mean, I think I like my team a lot actually. Like I'd be pretty happy in our home league if I ended up with this league. I'd be minus another quarterback, right? But I'd be pretty happy
Right.
with this lineup in my other league. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the draft. I think it's pretty balanced. I kind of went more value, but I shot for some upside with. I think there's risk there, especially around my running back room. I think I've got some risk that if it pays off, then I think it's good.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just knowing I'm going into it knowing I have risk, but because of that, I stashed more running backs and wide receivers on my bench, knowing that if they go down, I need depth. And I've got 3 running backs that are in pretty ambiguous or shared backfields. One that's a rookie that has some upside, but it's also backing up a fairly good, very steady running back with James Conner. So again, if it works out, it'd be great. If not, it's kind of it's a little rough there. So, but that's part of the risk of fantasy,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I like your value. I like you getting. I mean, you've got great value and more, and like I guess Chris Olave right there is good too. And I honestly love probably my favorite pick on your board is 6th round getting Dalton Kincaid, which I think people are really sleeping on him,
Yeah.
and I mean he's probably going to be Josh Allen's favorite target this year, which. Josh Allen was number 1 quarterback in fantasy like the last 2 years, right? So I mean, I think overall that's great value. I love that pick where it is, and then yeah, like getting Kyler Murray too. Like that's great.
Yeah. So as we look at this and thinking through drafts this weekend, Jamar Chase and Brandon Ayuk still have yet to report. They don't have contract situations. Are you avoiding or are you playing it safe or are you saying I believe they'll be there and I'm going to draft them? What is your thoughts on
Yeah,
that? We kind of touched on it a little bit, but how are you
yeah,
entering this weekend knowing it may be resolved and may not?
yeah. I mean, both of these guys, like in my personal opinion, I think Justin Jefferson is better than Jamar Chase as a
Right?
player. I also think Amon-Ra St. Brown is in a better situation than Jamar Chase just because I think the Bengals have taken some steps back with their offensive line, and we don't know
Yep.
how Joe Burrow's going to do this on this rebound year. And so, to me, let's say hypothetically you're the 5th pick, right? And it goes McCaffrey, Lamb, Hill, like at Justin Jefferson, and you're debating between like, do I get Bijan, Chase, or Amon-Ra St. Brown? Like to me, I think there's two. You can go running back or receiver there viably and not have to worry about it. Because at this point,
Yep.
like what concerns me about Chase is he played and then he went back to not playing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, we talked about this earlier. A lot of these players are incentivized to play. They get massive penalties if they don't, but it's a non-zero chance that egos get in the way. And at that point, if you're in that 5th spot, right, you have Chase slash Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I would argue are about the same. I think I actually like the Detroit situation better, honestly.
Right.
Or you've got Bijan if you want to go for this workhorse RB with new offensive coordinator Zach Robinson and new quarterback Kirk Cousins. So to
Yep.
me, like that, those are to me like that's like a no brainer. If you don't feel good about Chase, if you feel great about it, you go for it. But if you are hesitant, those are either a great receiver option or a great running back option that will start your team off. That I don't think leaves you wanting anything. It's not a significant drop. It's not going from like, in my opinion, like the Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and then there's like a step down after those
Yep.
top three, in my opinion, right? Like there's a definite like production difference. They're still really good, but there's a definite difference where I don't feel like you're missing much with those other people we talked about.
Yeah, I think personally, how I would say is if I'm in that spot where I have to choose, and it falls Chase, Bijan, Amon Ra, or Justin Jefferson, I'm probably
Yeah.
going either if I'm choosing wide receiver, it's Amon Ra, then Jefferson, then Chase. Now,
Mm,
last year I would have
you're
probably
right. Yeah.
I would have probably put Chase over Jefferson last year and said I'm taking Chase.
Yep.
I'm gonna die with that one all last year. I get the circumstance for Justin Jefferson is potentially not quite as good with Sam Darnold being the quarterback for the Vikings this year. But we did see him establish himself and do well with basically probably at least similar quarterback play last year with Nick Mullins and the like. So I feel better knowing that Jefferson has been with the team practicing all offseason. But I would probably also take Bijan over Chase in that first round, saying, let me take my RB1 and I'll
Yeah.
go back in the second round. I'll get a Garrett Wilson, a Drake London, a Marvin Harrison, or Devontae Adams and say, we'll be fine. So, yeah, that's it. It's a tough one. Um,
Yeah. Again, I think like the difference is you're. I understand like the difference. I think the debates like if people pass on, they get scared and skittish, right? Like
yes.
in our home league last year, right? Bijan was going as a end of first. Sorry, he was going ADP wise into first, early seconds maybe. I don't remember what pick I had. I think it was like fourth or fifth pick, maybe seventh pick. I don't remember exactly.
Right.
But like Bijan like fell to me in the second round. Like no one wanted to draft him. Everyone was like this rookie. Like I don't want to do it. And that's the situation where I think what we talking about here is like if Chase fell to you in these later rounds and you weren't expecting it, like are you pulling the trigger on Chase for his potential upside versus a
Right.
AJ Brown that you should have got at that round? You know what I'm saying? That's to me like the debate because I think like what you mentioned and what we talked about is if you're choosing four players that are all similar caliber, you pick the one that's at the contract dispute. But it's more of like
Yeah.
everyone gets scared Chase because bots will just pick it based on ADP regardless. Real
Right.
people, they're like, oh my gosh, Chase got a contract problem. All of a sudden, you're team 9 and Chase is on the board, and you're like, well, crap. I have AJ Brown to like deal with, or I got a Saquon, or I have Jamar Chase. Like that's where the dilemma would set in for me is like, all right, do I take the chance? And I think the answer is yes. Like if you
Right.
can get these players, which is an Ayuk or a Chase, in like the later first for Chase, or maybe Ayuk is like later third, honestly, early fourth, then it's like, all right, the value I'm getting for this outweighs the uncertainty. If it doesn't work out for a few weeks, the upside of them coming back and still doing well is high enough where it'd be worth it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up is know where you're going to take them. So, yeah, if you're in that late
Mm,
first and Chase is falling, especially if you're team 10 or even team 9 and you
mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
okay, Chase is here, if you know that whoever that team 10 owner is and say, I don't know if he's going to take him with his one of his two picks, so I'm going to take Chase and know I can, solidify that as well. Even if you say I'm going to take two wide receivers, and yeah, I take Chase at the end of the first
Mm,
round, come back with a London or a Garrett Wilson, let's say, and say,
yeah.
okay, I'm just going to double it up, and if it works out, great. If not, I shouldn't have gotten Chase there anyway. So it is what it
Yep.
is at that point.
Exactly. And like you can't go in the sunk cost where it's like, or not sunk cost, but like the opportunity cost, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, like Chase fell to me in the eighth or ninth round. Like if that's the value you want, great. But like 2 minutes ago, you were not expecting to get him at all, right? So
Right.
don't, again, like you don't have to play scared, but at the same time, you don't have to make all these mental exercises and jump through all these hoops because something happens unexpected and you still have your original plan in place. Like, yeah, like, oh my
Right.
gosh, like Justin, like this guy, like, or for you, for example, Jefferson at 8. I mean, I think that's great value in the first round at 8. Like, that's,
Yeah.
he's not falling that far in most drafts, right? And to me, like regardless of the quarterback play, he's been fantastic, right? So to me, that's a great value for you. Getting a fourth or fifth round pick or fourth or fifth pick overall in the eighth round and able to go Gibbs on the second.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a few other comments. There's some other news that came out, and we just kind of take the draft board look.
Mm.
So we see Rico Dowdle fall to the 14th. That it's not really falling for him a bit, but Zeke Elliott is now in the 12th round. Dalvin Cook signed with the Cowboys today, I believe it was. Um, do you see Dalvin Cook being a threat to either Elliott or Dowdle? Is it bolstering a running back room that, if I'm honest, when we saw James Cook, or not James Cook, Dalvin Cook last year with the Jets. It was kind of a train wreck, and it wasn't just because he was on the Jets. He did not look like he was ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's always real football wise, always good to bring in a veteran that knows what they're doing, right?
Right,
And 3 years ago, Dalvin Cook was the shining star of the Vikings offense, right? Before Justin Jefferson, and he was going in second, third rounds, right, every time.
right,
So to me, I think from a fantasy perspective, though, I think just muddies the water. Honestly, Zeke is the veteran who has the experience with the team, but he doesn't have the quickness. He doesn't have the pop. Dowdle has that, right? But then you start adding in Deuce Vaughn, who might get like some random, third down action, or like
right.
Zeke's tired after some pass blocking, and Vaughn comes in. He's really tiny, but like he comes in to like do some chop blocks, and I think it just muddies the water. Personally, I don't love the Dallas running back situation. I think at this point you can stash one or two if you really like them or like Dallas. You want to have a stake in the game, but then I think you need to wait probably 3 or 4 weeks to really figure out how McCarthy's using those players, because right now like they have, to me they have like 4 RB2s on the team. That's what they have, right? So it's
Sure.
gonna be the pecking order, how they're gonna figure out the plays, and I think it really that Dallas running back room's muddied, in my opinion.
Well, and we didn't see what was speculated the entire time was that Javonte Williams was either going to be cut or traded from Denver,
Mm.
and he could land with Dallas. And that didn't happen. We saw Samaje Perine got cut. He signed with Kansas City now.
Yep.
I think it's a depth piece. I don't see Perine taking the running back spot from Pacheco. If anything, it just adds depth with CEH there. They let Jerick McKinnon go, so I think there's a depth piece behind. Pacheco doesn't have danger of losing his job to Perine. But again, like you just said, real football wise, it's better to bring in a veteran who can pick up the playbook quick and could spell a starter if needed, and they don't lose a lot of production. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I see.
Yeah. No, I agree. Same thing is I think people are moving. There's pieces that are moving around. Running backs on different teams. Ultimately, what coaches want to see is like, hey, I think that as we've seen drafted, right, there are only a handful of running backs that are like getting the quote unquote bell cow designation, right? Because coaches don't want their athletes to get injured, right? Obviously, so you see a lot more trades at deadline. Yeah, so that was good. I guess before we move on from, I guess the overall just depth and roster and things like that, were there any cuts on the rosters that surprised you? Was there anything notable fantasy wise that you thought could change either draft boards or how you play the first few weeks of the season?
Um, the one surprising one that I saw wasn't a cut, but I was a little surprised to see that Washington traded Jahan Dotson to the Eagles.
Mm,
And I think that bolsters the value of Terry McLaurin. But I think if you don't get Terry McLaurin and you're looking on waiver wires, I think Luke McCaffrey, the rookie for them this year, could be an interesting waiver wire stash. Um, Also, De'Ami Brown could be that deep target for uh, Jaden Daniels that we see able to go up deep for him. So that was an interesting one to me that I saw. Other than I wasn't surprised by Samaje Perine getting cut. Yeah, I don't know that there was anything drastically impactful that says based on this cut,
yeah.
um, it changes how I look at
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah, and I think for me the cuts weren't so much of like, oh wow, like this person I thought about starting or having my bench is no longer playing football.
right,
It was more of like looking at depth, like you just mentioned, like all right, because of the roster cuts, because of the restructuring, now it looks like McLaurin has a cleaner shot
right,
for this standout receiver one role that Jalen Daniels is going to be desperate to have, right? He's going to
right.
desperately need some kind of connection. So that lends to either him or that the rookie from Kansas State, right? Both of those guys to like make names for themselves with one less like mouth to feed, so to speak, that
Mm-hmm.
has experience in the NFL.
Yeah. Um, I will say I was a little surprised, but not really when I saw the cut. So, of course, you and I follow Kansas City very closely. I'm right in the backyard of Kansas City, so it would go to that would just make sense. But they signed Juju Smith Schuster again this year, and I don't think, in my opinion, Juju is not a starter that I'm looking at. I think that's a real
Mm,
NFL sign to add depth to the wide receiver room because after they signed him, they let Kadarius Toney go and they let Justin Ross go as well. So I think that was a depth piece that he was on the roster 2 years ago. He's familiar with the Andy Reid system. He's familiar with Patrick Mahomes. He can step in, but it's not he is not as talented at this point in his career as the wide receivers that are currently going to start, meaning Rashi Rice, when Hollywood Brown is back, him or Xavier Worthy. I
mm.
think they'll give Worthy a lot more chances with trading up to get him, all that stuff. So I think that's something also to be aware of. Just because a player signs or is traded doesn't always mean, hey, this is the best thing. We have to go get this player who's going to start every game. It's just a,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
this is, yeah, yeah,
yeah. I agree with you. I think that Um, it just kind of depends on what the team's goal is, right? In Kansas City, I think you're right. Like they moved Justin Ross to the practice squad, so he's been on the team for a year. Like there's a bunch of reorganization where it's like, all right, we want to have this many receivers and we want to have a certain depth to what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, overall, I didn't really have that many comments or thoughts on the waiver cuts, but I did. There were some trades and some like movement around that's interesting. Like for example, like the Rams got a little worse personally when they traded away their middle linebacker, the captain of their defense.
yeah,
I think they got a fifth round pick and they gave him in a sixth round. I think it was. So stuff like that where I think that little things like that keeping track of those is helpful because that can change defenses or can change offenses, especially if there's a lot of movement.
yeah. Do you have any, so kind of along this surprising but news? So we found out today that Pittsburgh named Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback
Mm,
over Justin Fields, at least for
mm,
week one. Um,
Yeah.
do you have any issues drafting pass catchers? I want to say pass catchers, so wide receivers, tight ends in Pittsburgh with Russell Wilson. Is there any sort of hesitancy over that as you enter drafts?
Um, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty concerned. If I'll be honest, I'm decently concerned. I mean, it kind of goes to show you, like, just look at the amount of Pittsburgh players on our draft boards, right? Like, you got the running backs, you have Najee, you have Jalen Warren, but there usually is always a Steelers receiver in the first couple rounds, right?
Right.
Now, if that's Deontay Johnson last few years or whoever else that's been Juju or others, right? But,
Uh huh.
you
This year
know,
it's George
it really,
Pickens.
correct. Correct. And like George Pickens is kind of like what people are coming with, but again, I think his value is being limited big time, right, by the fact that you've got Russell Wilson or Justin Fields behind him, right? Like it's not great.
Yeah.
Um, it's tough. Like because right now, what George Pickens is going in like this early sixth, late fifth, I think, right now
Yep.
for a 10-man ish league. So I think for fantasy value, I think this was of course coaches don't care about fantasy stuff, but this was definitely a Mike Tomlin CYA type of quarterback decision. I think the potential for Fields, even though he's been in the NFL for only a couple years, the potential for him, his ceiling is much higher than Russell Wilson is at this point. I think he wants consistent quarterback play, and he thinks the defense can win them games. Is what to me Mike Tomlin is saying with choosing Wilson over Fields.
And that's kind of what we talked about in our offseason when we
Yeah.
covered Pittsburgh was last year they played with the style of let's make it an ugly game, let's be defensive, let's win it that way. And I think we're seeing the setup for that again, which, okay, if I'm drafting Najee or maybe Jalen Warren, I'm okay with that because that type of play style lends to the running back a little bit more. I'm hesitating more on Pickens because is my upside limited
Mm.
more than not. So, yeah, I think it's something always be aware of what is the team signaling to us, and I think we can do a better job of seeing what the team's actually signaling based on what they're saying, what they're doing by their moves. So,
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it just kind of depends on the team and what they're doing. But again, these also there's real people. There's real people with real
yep.
jobs they're trying to do stuff. And fantasy wise, it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. But yeah, I mean, I think Mike Tomlin's again playing for his job, and it's not going to be pretty. I don't think Pittsburgh games are going to be pretty, but who knows? They might stumble to another 9-8 record.
Yep, he's not had a under 500 season yet. So, if he
Yep.
does, it'll be the first. So, all right, as we exit the off season, so this is the last show for fantasy football preps before we have actual football to discuss. What is there one team that as you look at it and you say I am a little bit lower on than what I read or hear than what people are saying, and then is there a team that you're higher on than what people are either saying or that's just not being talked about?
Yeah, I think the team that I'm low on fantasy wise, I
Mm-hmm.
think they're going to make it to the playoffs, but the LA Rams, I think, is
Oh,
what a team that I'm low on, just for fantasy perspective, because I think that your how ADPs are working right now, you have Matt Stafford, who's a good quarterback when he's healthy, but
yep,
that's a big if, right? Then
big
you
if.
have Puka, who is right now being drafted off of his ceiling from last year, his only year in the league. You have Cooper Cup, who is being drafted at probably the mid range of what his value has been in years past, but he was injured last year, right? So you have a ceiling and a mid play off of two receivers for a quarterback that is a good, not elite quarterback. Like he's good. He is not elite. He's not the top tier of the Burrow, the Allen, the Mahomes. Then you have McVay's whole running back situation of Kyron and Blake Corum. Kyron's apparently doing punt returns. Apparently he's not. Corum's an important part of the offense, and sorry. And Kyron was in the exact same situation a couple years ago where he was like a part of the offense and got injured. I mean, I think the Rams, from a fantasy perspective, are a bit of a mess, honestly. I mean, I think if you need to stream for a Superflex league, Stafford, or if your main quarterback is on bye, Stafford's a great pick. And I think if he has a streak of really good teams he's playing against, I think it's not the worst idea to stream him. But and again, I'm not saying the Rams players are bad. I just think like they're being drafted above. Their ADPs are showing a value that I don't think is reflective of what this season's going to be.
Nope, I get that. So I like that call. I think that's a very apt way of looking at how they're being drafted. I'm gonna do you one better though here. Not to one up you. So we did not prep these beforehand, so we did not talk about this. I'm gonna take another NFC West team. I am very much questioning the San Francisco 49ers. Now, that is not to say they are not a good football team. They were in the Super Bowl last year. This is a very good football team. They're very well run. However, we are less than a week. Well, no, we are coming up on a week to season. And Christian McCaffrey is still dealing with calf strain, or at least that's been there. And I know he's only 28, but he's still being drafted as the overall RB1 based on what he did last year. I have a little trouble with his injury history to say there's none of that. Part of that goes to they're still dealing with Trent Williams' contract he's holding out. That offensive line, if that breaks down, that's going to hurt McCaffrey. It will also hurt Brock Purdy, who was a very accurate passer last year. I think he set a record in his accuracy and what he threw. That could return to the mean, and so that lowers the offense ability. Doesn't mean I don't think Kyle Shanahan is not a good coach. I think he's a fantastic coach. I think the offense is one of the best offenses that has been in the league. Purdy was one of the few quarterbacks that in the Super Bowl, Steve Spagnuolo had to say, well, we had to shift what we had to do. He made us do that. So it's a very good offense. I think we've had a lot happen in the offseason that could turn it a little bit upside down, that they have another off year. And if injuries pile up, all of a sudden you're looking at a team that's probably fighting for a playoff spot, not taking the top seed in the NFC. So I'm a little concerned about the 49ers.
No, good point. And that's when you combine West Coast team with, it's a high profile team, right? And then you combine that with a lot of star players that are just good at their job and good at their roles.
Yeah.
Then you end up with a team where everyone wants to get paid and there's only so much money to go around. So like you said, I mean, good case in point of just both Trent Williams and Ayuk, and there's a lot of factors involved with the offense that could go awry if certain people don't get paid and certain people can't throw the ball well.
Yep. So that's the team I'm probably down on, and it's a high profile team. But so what would be a team you'd be a little bit higher on, or willing to take the potential upside that may be being missed right now?
Probably the Packers. I think that, like, I honestly, I really like for the NFC. I really like Detroit going to the Super Bowl. I like their picks. The Rams are kind of a sleeper pick. I could see the Rams, like, we talk about football later, right? But I think I can see the Rams being a wild card spot, like a 6 or 7 seed, and then
Sure.
But Detroit's probably going to win the 1 seed. If the 49ers, I don't know, between them and the 49ers. But anyways, I think that the Packers, though, are one that people are kind of sleeping on, just because they're in the same division and there's a lot of, like, back and forth on what's going on. And you saw Jordan Love kind of, like, have his breakout second half season last year, which is fantastic. But I think overall the receivers, like obviously they're getting drafted well, but I think that overall, like the Packers in general, are just kind of being slept on. I mean, again, I don't know, like slept on, like they're really like they're way lower, but I think Jordan Love is going to be a better quarterback than
Yeah.
his ADP reflects.
Well, and they're in a division like you just said. The Lions are kind of the talk of the NFL, or at least of the NFC. The Bears are now also the talk because Caleb Williams is there. So again, the Packers are really that steady. They're just there. But why aren't they there? Um, Being talked about as, I mean, they could have beat the Niners last year in
Mm.
in the divisional round. That could have happened. They could
Yep.
have. They were there. So I like that. I think they're getting a little slept on. So mine, from a real football sense, teams I like for fantasy wise, I think are being slept on. I think if they're a good football team, I think that means they went 9-8. So I don't think they're going to have the best record. I think 9-8 is kind of their ceiling. But I think the team that's being slept on a little bit from a fantasy perspective is Tennessee. Now, it
Mm.
could be because they're a small market team. They don't have, similar like the Packers where they're just there and people just don't pay attention to them as much because they're not in the big markets. They don't have the big splashy plays. But new head coach, Brian Callahan, who should bring a different offensive system than what we've seen there in the past. They don't have Derrick Henry anymore. This is not a run first team, in my opinion. This team is being
Mm.
built to throw, to do what Will Levis wants to do. Now, Will Levis is playing for a starting job or a backup job after this year. If he does well, he earns a starting job. If he does not, he's a backup at best after this year. So
Mm.
he's playing for a starting job this year. Even though he's starting, he's playing for a starting job to continue. So that's a lot riding on him. Um, but I think we're going to see some pretty good fireworks from this team. And they have a tough beginning of the season. So even if they are 2-3 after 5 weeks, I think that's a win for them, depending on how those, I think they're going to be close losses. So I think
Mm.
being slept on, DeAndre Hopkins had any issue. I think he fell enough in drafts. He's a value again. Um, Calvin Ridley could be a lot better in the role that they want him to play than what he was in Jacksonville. I think they brought in another pass catching running back because they want two running backs that can catch the ball out of the back of the field, out of the backfield.
Mm.
So I think we'll see, even if this is from a fantasy perspective, if Will Levis turns out to be Jameis Winston 30 for 30, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, we care a lot more about that in fantasy than we do real football. So I think
Mm.
we could see
Yeah,
some
good
potential
point.
with Tennessee. So that'd be mine.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I like those picks a lot. I think it definitely is factored into, like, they have not been very good, and on top of that, small market definitely plays a factor. I think in just overall how they're viewed fantasy wise.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Grant, we made it through the offseason. We have
I know.
one weekend before actual NFL and finishing up drafts. You and I've got one more home league to do coming up Labor Day, and then that's it. We're talking football, actual football coming up.
Whew. I'm ready. I'm ready.
It's exciting. All right. Well, Grant, this was fun. Any final party wisdom words for our final off-season show here?
No, I mean, I would just say, like we said last week, pay attention to the news. Just make sure that you're, right before your draft, or at least caught up. Not everybody has time to look at every single day notifications, but just before your draft, take 5-10 minutes, look at some major news, make sure nothing's crazy has happened before you draft.
Yep, that's good advice. I would, if you haven't drafted yet, good for you. You wait as long as you can. Um, be Bayesian in your process, meaning be ready to change when you get new information. Don't go in
Yep.
thinking I need this player, I need that player. Be ready to change with information. So be willing to be wrong and change once you get that information. So, all right. Well, that'll do it for this week, Grant. Appreciate you jumping on as always and pulling the chair up around this table here. So, with that, we will see everybody next week for actual NFL prep.